Okay, we got it on. So we're doing a recording. So tonight, basically what I want to do is sort of give you a little deeper overview of what you're reading in Theory U. And if you're like your colleagues from previous cohorts, that it takes you about 5 weeks or so really to start getting into this, to begin to see it. You know, the book itself is kind of thick. It's you know, his writing style is not the greatest in the world, and that's why I give you videos and the whole bit. But what I found out over the 7 years that I've been using Theory U in these classes is that over time students really begin to say this stuff's starting to make some sense to them as practical tools, both for themselves, but more importantly, to help to get them to understand their leadership style, particularly in trying to get people within any organization that you're working in begin to understand possibilities of the future also. So I just want to give you that caveat a little bit that in the beginning, you know, some of the stuff might be strange, you know, a little different in terms of thinking, but and again, at the end of 10 weeks, you still might not buy totally into it, but that's okay because at least it's going to expose you to a different framework for thinking, which, you know, might not totally tie into yours, but, you know, in the long run, you might say, yeah, maybe some of this stuff does make sense. So just so you have that kind of overview. Now, speaking of overview, what I like to do just real quickly is just hear some of your comments about that overview effect video that I had you watch last week. I know a couple of people that couldn't make it did write back to me about, you know, what they saw and what it did to their own thinking. But I'd like, you know, just kind of an open, you know, forum here for you to just kind of chime in and say, hey, you don't have to raise your hand, you can just jump in.
All right, I'll just jump in. So Steve and I actually managed to talk yesterday about it.
Okay.
And he was saying, we both kind of were saying our thoughts on it. And I said, you know, I'm the type of person, I've wanted to go to Mars since I was like a little kid. And I live in Houston. I mean, I'm at NASA like every other weekend. And there's something about truly seeing a system from the outside that makes you able to change it from the inside. So had the astronauts not said, hey, let's just take a picture, right? Then all of us on the Earth would never have seen this picture because we're living in it. So it resonates really well with the balcony and dance floor metaphor that we heard in 800. But it speaks to a larger, you know, sci-fi works really well because it takes everything in our world but puts it in a fake one. And then we learn about our real world in a fake world. So I saw a lot of parallels there to the type of work that we're doing in terms of changing a system and needing to get out of that system to see it from the top to be able to change it.
Okay, my only comment to you is that with science fiction, a lot of times it's not a fake world because sometimes it becomes a reality. So think about Gene Roddenberry. Just throw that out there. So
I appreciate that. I was thinking about The Matrix, which you'll become quite familiar with my frequent references to The Matrix, which thank you for my colleagues and peers for being, I guess, understanding.
Well, you know, and The Matrix is going to become something we got to think about, particularly as AI begins to explode. So that concept of Matrix is not so far-fetched as a lot of people, you know, might think it is. So, you know, I'm just saying, don't look at science fiction as necessarily, you know, outer world per se. A lot of times it's visionary to what's going to happen.
It's future fact, right?
Yep. So other points of view around the overview effect when you watched it.
I like the way, I actually wrote down that he said, see what we know, but what we don't experience. So we know it's there, but we don't experience it. So to see it from that point of view was really interesting. I think for me, these classes have just helped me maybe think a minute or two before I open my mouth in some senses, and just taking in everyone, like the big picture instead of just my world. So I'm appreciative of that.
Okay. Others.
One of the things I thought of with it was that, they talked a big deal about, the first look at it and all those kind of things. I grew up never not knowing that picture didn't exist. And so it'll be interesting to see how a lot of these theories or ideas of the overview effect hit when you have a generation that never didn't have a full picture of the world from that perspective. Mm-hmm. So that concept of seeing it for the first time, that doesn't exist for my age folks. We always knew it existed. And so how is that going to shift our thinking when our thinking already sees that? Will that make it easier? Will that make it more difficult because it's not an all in wonder thing like it used to be back then? It'd be curious to see where we land with that in the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay.
One of the things that I've learned, not only in this class but the other classes so far, has been looking at things through the perspective of my wife, who went to school in India. She got her degrees in India, and obviously her high school and elementary years were all in India. Space exploration and space education is not really taught there in schools. So it's just not taught unless you're, and we won't get into this now, but if some of y'all don't know, in India, you take a test in 7th grade, and based on the results of your test, that's the career that you're kind of geared towards. So my wife didn't qualify for a career in sciences, so she was never taught the sciences past 7th grade. If she wanted to pursue that, that's something that she could do on her side. She was chosen to go into public relations or PR work. So looking at this overview effect and looking at those pictures, and the idea of space exploration still boggles her mind to this day. She's 37 years old. So it's really enlightening to look at it from her perspective, because it's something we grew up with. The moon landing with Neil Armstrong is astonishing to her. I mean, she's just like, I can't believe we did that. And she honestly does believe that it didn't happen.
Oh, really?
She thinks it's a conspiracy. She thinks it's a conspiracy by Western civilization to show its superiority over Eastern cultures.
Did she watch this with you?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
She did.
Okay.
And it blew her mind.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Interesting. Any other thoughts?
I can say another thought if you want.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I forget who said it, but there was one astronaut that said it really makes you feel like you're part of the poem that is like the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that was beautiful because at once, like there's meter and there's rhythm to a poem. So there are rules, right? But also it's entirely creative. It's art. And so if you take that back to our context, right, in education, what are the actual rules? And again, because I can't make it 30 seconds without quoting the Matrix, right? Like there is no spoon, right? So once you start reinventing what the rules are in the poem, you see yourself as part of the poem, yeah, but also able to author a whole new one. Mm-hmm. So I thought that comparison was quite interesting because we're authoring new poems every single day with the programs that we lead or the classes that we teach, or trying to measure how things, Matthew, I'll just comment on your discussion board for the other class, how having like a Christian mindset affects someone's faith, right, later on in life. So these things that are kind of intangible that you can't quite measure, how does that add to the poem that is our students' life? I don't know.
Yeah, no, and again, the reason I show you the overview effect is that it really ties into what Sharma's talking about, to turn, the camera on ourselves in essence. So what's very important about that overview is that, as they stated, that it's the first time we were able to see our planet from the outside. And that picture that I have there, where I took the screenshot of that, if you remember, that's where they were showing the electrical storms in the clouds. But what else is extremely important is that little line that is above the Earth there, and it's kind of that greenish line there, and that's it, folks. That's the atmosphere. That goes, we go. And so to show the fragileness of this planet in the context of the entire universe, it does force us to begin to reflect differently back on it. So if you remember, as they were going through and flying over and taking pictures of the Earth, as they said, you see no geographical boundaries in relationship, or political boundaries, or anything. So flying over India, you don't see India per se. There's no divide there. It's just the Earth itself. But you do see the impact of what humankind does to the Earth, and that ability to think back and to look back and to develop our attention is probably the most important thing about it. And that this particular group of astronauts, in this whole group that formed the Overview organization, that it has had profound impact on anyone who's gone into space, and particularly who was Mitchell when he was going around the moon. And as they were talking about those types of issues and how it makes you reflect back on who we really are when you see this planet sitting out there in the cosmos itself. And it ties into really what Sharma's going to get us to really do a deep dive in trying to find out the source of who you are, in relationship to leadership. And if you think about going back to 800, that Peter Senge talks about, that really systems are nothing more than patterns of relationships. So how you create relationships becomes important. So this is kind of a neat thing to get people to begin to think about this. And I strongly suggest that like if you're a building principal, or even if you're a classroom teacher, that you should show this to students, or to show it to your colleagues, because it does have a lot of power to it in relationship to who we are as human beings on this planet. So that I just wanted to give you that editorial, because I think it's kind of important to think about it. And the whole issue of and I grew up in the late 40s and into the 50s, and I remember today I can still visualize this, when Kennedy gave his speech about going to the moon, and then I can remember that day when it happened. But it was interesting, you said, like in India, etc., the whole world, there's pictures of the whole world, man. They were all looking at this thing, around the world. It was just amazing to see human beings, land on this other object that was outside the realm of the Earth. So again, it has a lot of deep philosophical concepts to it. I think it has, obviously has spiritual concepts to it. It has, and it has pure science to it. So those things I think are important. Okay. And any other closing comments around that overview effect?
It's Alethea.
Yes.
I pretty much looked at the video as an extension of ED 800, when it was when we had to think about our mental models and what forms our views of leadership.
Yep.
And so when I looked at the video and I look at the line going around, I'm now looking at it as for us to force beyond those borders. What is out beyond that rim? What is out beyond that line that circles the Earth? What is out beyond the line that changes your leadership, enforces your leadership, alters your leadership, expands your leadership? So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I like that. So it got you, to do a little different type of reflection. And like you said, it expanded off of, the 800 material. But it does, because we're all in that thing right there. That's our home. It's our only home. And yeah, maybe, Musk will get us to Mars someday, because that, and I guess the head of Amazon wants to go there, et cetera. And there's really some movement towards that. I don't know how many of you watch the National Geographic television network, this series called Mars. Really interesting, because what they did was they did a docudrama of us going to Mars. So it was part drama, but it was interspersed with real science about the possibilities, about the dangers, about what's going on there. Much different than the movie The Martian with Matt Damon, which was kind of interesting if you saw that particular movie. So again, the question that I think, as you think about this, and as we delve into Theory U, and you think about the visioning component related to systems thinking, that one of the questions we really have to ask ourselves is, what's the vision today for us? And I think that becomes a very critical issue, because a lot of people argue that why we're in the turmoil that we are, whether it be in this country or around the world, is that we've lost our story, that there's no story. There's no story anymore. And so you see a battle between nationalism and globalism and all these things coming out, but no one has really, no one's telling a story. There's no sense of the future. So I think that is something from a leadership point of view. Those of you, who directly work with the younger generation, and I'm talking about in the K-12 environment, that's becoming a pretty critical issue that we have to, really begin to think about from our own roles. Okay? So anything else related to this particular thing? All right. So moving into this, then really what happens here is as you begin to look at reality, and again, here's a little, not pushback, but a reflective on 800. So if you remember in the iceberg, we had the events. So so the question here is, if awareness never reaches beyond superficial events that are going on, we're always going to be reactive to it. So if you're a classroom teacher and if you're a building principal and you don't move beyond the present event, then all that's going to do is it's going to keep repeating itself, and in reality, we're going to drown in events because we never get into this next level. As you know, in terms of the iceberg, in terms of that metaphor, are the patterns and trends of trying to understand what's going on with these events. But the other thing that's extremely important is, how do we understand how the structure of any organization, and again, structure, in schools are curriculum, the schedule, policy, contracts, and things of that, how they shape our behavior over time. That if we're not aware of that, then that's why we kind of keep doing the same thing over and over again. And then obviously, as you brought up, is our mental models, which underpin that, are extremely important for us to begin to think about. So what the U really begins to do is to do a deep dive into the mental models, to really begin to give you the types of tools. So really what Sharma's saying to you is that we really have to go much deeper into, the holes that generate what is, and our own connection to the wholeness. So if you think about the overview effect and what that did to these astronauts, that it just expanded their awareness of what they as an individual is in relationship to this planet, then this is really the source of effectiveness of our actions. And this is where Theory U gets you to do a deep dive into who you are. So I think that's important for you to understand that relationship. So really we're taking the iceberg, and this quarter we're really going into a deeper dive into the mental models. Does that make sense, or at least give you a good framework? So I find my little thing here to be able to go to the next one. There we go. So as we look at this, one of the things that Charmer talks about is that all learning is about integrating thinking and doing. And I think that becomes very important for you to understand that the learning about how we interact with the world really is the way for you to understand what are the capabilities that you have in terms of creating those interactions and understanding them. But what happens is, particularly in our present structure of schooling, particularly the emphasis on standardized testing, and I'll just raise it from this point of view, is that it, to one extent, it negates the doing part of learning. And that it's trying to really focus on what Senge says is really creating in the mind of the learner and creating the mental model that all learning is nothing more than right and wrong answers. But life is much more complex. The issues are much more complex. So what Charmer's really getting you to begin to think about is, and he talks about this, is the two sources of learning for a leader. And that first one simply is the one that most of us function in all the time. And that is that we reflect from the experiences of the past. So we act, we observe, we reflect, we plan, we act. And that's where this downloading is extremely important for you to understand that, because what downloading is nothing more than constantly reenacting our old habits. It doesn't allow us to get to a deeper level of what thinking and doing is about. And generally, that's the way in which we've been structured in our educational system. And again, that educational system, so again, like you talked about your wife growing up in India, well, that educational system was influenced by the British Empire. And so, when Britain colonized, Africa and the Asian countries, what basically happened there was that model was promoted right across the board. And so this is it. You act, you observe, you reflect, you plan, you act. When you look at most of the literature around leadership, that's generally what you see. You got theory X, theory Y, all those things. And those things you're reading in the Gallo's book really are designed to get you to look at some of the shifts that are beginning to take place in relationship to leading beyond this form of learning to what Charmer really begins to talk about in relationship to the learning now, is learning from the future as it emerges from presencing. And what that really is talking about is that the deeper levels of learning then are really based upon this process of thinking and doing and understanding that. So if you think about STEM or STEAM and maker spaces and what we're trying to get kids to do with learning with their hands, that's sort of emerging in this framework. And what he basically is saying there for you is that the more you integrate and understand doing and thinking together, the deeper level you will get to increasing your awareness of the whole system. Like a couple of you said, wow, I looked at that overview effect, and it really got me to see the wholeness, because that's what you heard many of the astronauts saying, that it increased their awareness beyond any possibility that if you're stationary on this planet. So what happens then, as he says, is that the action then increasingly serves the total picture, the whole. And you're going to see that as we go down the U. Now, let me stop here and just say, okay, what's going through your heads right now, as I throw that stuff out? Does this make sense? Are you kind of still thinking about it? Or, what type of questions does this raise for you? The reason I ask you to think about that is, remember, two types of learning. Presently, those of you who are in the K-12 environment and also in the university environment, it doesn't matter where, is that still, we're really locked into the traditional way of really functioning and working on the past as opposed to moving forward into the future. And as I mentioned to you, that one of the problems that we're faced with today is that there seems to be a lack of vision going forward, as opposed to a wanting to return to the past, whatever the past might be. And so I think these things become extremely important, that you as an individual and also as a person who has leadership capacity needs to really understand the difference between those. Because where it comes from, and I think, and this is important for you to think about, because even as you do your own research and start moving into thinking about what your dissertation and your study is going to be, is that, does anybody know who that gentleman is right there? It's not my grandfather. That is Kurt Lewin. Kurt Lewin is a psychologist, was psychologist, and actually it is this social psychology underpins the entire formation of Theory U. This is where action research comes from. So what Lewin was always wanting to look at was, and what social psychology is all about, is one of the first psychologists really to begin to look at group dynamics and to look at organizational development. And so what comes out of this is, and I think when you look at that slide there, my sense is you probably say, yeah, that's very true, because what I belong to and the groups that I belong to and where I am is that's what forms my actions. And if you remember the ladder of inference, remember that in 800, Chris Argyris's work with the ladder of inference, that how do we formulate our mental models, it's a lot of it has to do with how we perceive our surroundings and how we interact with people. So those of you who are familiar with Vygotsky and his teaching style with kids, is that social interaction, the social dynamics in the classroom, it is extremely important in formulating how an individual thinks about learning. So again, this gives you a little bit of an underpinning of what's driving Scharmer's point of view, and it comes out of the work of Kurt Lewin, which actually Lewin underpins a lot of what we do in this EDD program because of your ability to do action research. Okay? So with that then, these are the key concepts that I'm going to keep drilling these into your head to keep thinking about, because when you do your interview activity, that you're going to actually work going down the left side of the U as you interview the individual, eventually who the leader will be. But before you, and that's why I said to you, I do not want you to think about who you're going to do this with, but until you understand what these terminology is all about. So really, this is the key. You might be doing this right now. So really, what as I talk to you about this and I throw these ideas out at you, sometimes your tendency might be I'm going to, what he's saying doesn't really jibe with my past experiences. And I'm thinking about, even though he's asking me to give some comments, I'm not going to do that right now because the structure of this isn't there, but I disagree with this, and I'm not sure, but I'm not sure if I really want to get into an argument because I like this over by 7:30. So my point is, that's what downloading is. That's what it's about, is that when we're not aware of our habitual actions to any type of situation, our tendency is to keep doing the same old, same old. How many of you sat in faculty meetings or any type of meeting and it's the same old, over and over again? Why? Because of downloading. We get trapped in that because we're not aware of it. So that to me is one of the most important ones that you've got to become highly aware of, because once you are, then what is able to take place here is you start getting this conceptual framework, the way in which the iceberg got you to think about going deeper into understanding structure and understanding patterns of behavior, and how the assumptions that drive whatever our system is doing or does is really the essence of what the U is attempting to get you to do. Because the more you understand how to overcome downloading, then the possibilities of new realities that are in line with our visions and where we want to go, or our purpose, is those possibilities will happen more and more. And that's important for you to understand about what this is. So there's 3 movements, obviously, going down the U, and that really gets you to become aware, and I'm going to use the word aware, of those things within any situation you're in that's really important to you. So you begin to think about that. And then when you get to the bottom of the U, once you begin to understand how you can develop empathetic listening and understand empathetic conversation, what then begins to emerge is that question: how can we become part of the story of the future rather than holding on to the story of the past? That to me is critical. And as a former superintendent, and as a person who has always tried to move a school into the future, the most difficult thing I still see going on over and over again is, as we try to do reform in schools, actually all we end up doing is recreating the past. Because quite frankly, even with all the interjection of technology into our schools over the years, billions of dollars, nothing has really changed structurally. The day looks the same, the schedule's the same, the contractual arrangements are the same, policies are the same, testing is the same. Now, we might have some different relationships in the classroom because we've got smart boards. We might now start seeing maker spaces and those things. But in reality, though, we're still holding on to the past. So that's important for you to begin to understand that as you get down there. And then as you go up to U, really now you're beginning to explore the future and what the possibilities are that could come out of the types of conversations that will emerge. So in a nutshell, that's the essence of what the U looks like. And I think it's a very powerful tool the more you explore it and the deeper you get into it. So the first part of it then is this idea of sensing. How do you become more attuned to your present reality? What is that? What do we need to do in order for that to happen? Because then what the presencing does really is designed to open up possibilities, but it's coming, if you see that, discovering our general source of commitment. So why am I doing this? So if you're a leader and you're a building principal, let's say, why are you a building principal? What's driving you? What is it that, and how is that reflected in your habitual actions towards individuals, both adults and kids and parents, etc.? So that's what it gets you to look at. And then this idea of realizing then is, okay, how do we individually and collectively transform our actions to the service of seeking change? So if you think about what you learned in 800 from Heifetz and Linsky, the leadership, the dance floor and the balcony, and the idea of the difference between managing and leading, and the difference between adaptive and technical change. These things are now starting. If you begin to look at this, you're getting a fuller picture of what you can do as an individual leader. Now let me stop right at this point. Any comments, questions, or need for clarification, or thoughts, or whatever? Or I'm doing such a great job, man, you guys are getting this with no problem. So, all right. So anyway, let me keep going. So presidency. Listen to this.
My own life, for the first time, had a probably really tangible experience of these two types and qualities of self. I grew up in Germany, in northern Germany, near Hamburg, on a farm, and we lived in a 250, 300-year-old farmhouse, and every morning, kind of my three siblings and I, we would go by train into the city where our school was located. And on this morning, everything went normal until the last class, when the principal came in and told me to go home ahead of time. But she didn't mention why. But I noticed that her eyes were slightly red, as if she had cried just prior to talking to me. So that was slightly odd, but I couldn't make sense of it. And I took my bag, went to the train station. I called home, but there was no ring, no nothing. The line was dead. I boarded the train and arrived at the final destination. I exited, and there was another 8 kilometers to go to the farm. No bus, no one to pick me up. So the first time in my life, I would take a taxi. And halfway home, I suddenly see it, that the whole sky was black, and that the smoke was arising from exactly from the place where the farm used to be. The next thing I remember is kind of the last kilometer. The driveway to the farm was totally blocked by vehicles, hundreds of people and firefighters. And I remember running past all these people and coming to stop right in front of the fireplace. And my mind cannot believe what my eyes tell me to see, which is that the entire world I had been living in up to that moment no longer existed, went up in flames. And only in that moment of loss, with all of that gone, I realized how much I had been attached to it, how much my identity had been attached to to that world. And it feels like as if someone is pulling away the ground under your feet, so you drop into some space of nothingness. And when that happened, I realized that there is still a tiny little part of myself left. And that's the one who is watching all that, who is taking all of that in. And when I realized that, I felt like time was slowing down, and I felt for a moment kind of pulled upwards and began to experience the situation from a little bit kind of above my own physical body. And I felt pulled upwards to a source that in that moment was totally clear to me what it was. It was connected to a field of future possibility that I and only I could bring into reality with my future journey. The next morning, my grandfather, who was 87, who happened to be in the final week of his life, and who just was brought to an hospital a few days earlier from us, he came to what should be his last visit. So somebody drove him by and he exited the car, and then he didn't even turn his head to the fireplace, kind of that, where small fires were still working. But he went straight up to my father, who was doing the cleanup work. And he took his hand and he said, "Head up, my boy, look forward. Kopf hoch, mein Junge, blick nach vorn." And these words, "Head up, my boy, look forward," made a deep impression on me, because they embodied an attitude that when you are in the final week of your life and something kind of that you have been cultivating, developing your whole life just went up in flames, that you make the conscious choice to not turn your attention on the loss, but to turn your attention on the horizon of possibility that was opening up through this event. This choice made a big impression on me. And only many years after, when I went to MIT and when I started to focus on learning from the past versus learning from the emerging future, I started to do my best work. But it was all seeded back then in that event, where I experienced, in a nutshell, kind of where I basically received a gift from life. And the gift was kind of that this experience facilitated a letting go gesture, a process that I went through, letting go of one part of myself that I was very familiar with, and open up an experience of another part of myself that I wasn't even aware of that it would exist before. And ever since, kind of that kind of experience and that kind of sense of a sense of a future possibility has become a very important navigator for me. And for now, so that's my story. And now what I would suggest is that you take a moment and you think about what experience have you had in your life, kind of something where something happened to you that either clarified or deepened or changed your sense of who you really are. So think about an experience or a little story, kind of where something happened that clarified, deepened, or changed your sense of who you really are. And what I learned is that many of us, in fact, most of us, have these stories. And what you first think is, oh, I don't have that kind of story. So he has kind of that story, but I don't have a story like that. Well, just remember, that's stage one. Just stay with the question. So what is that type of experience that I may have had? Stay with the question, you will find one or several stories will come up. And it may be a story of letting go and letting come, like the one that I shared, or maybe a different story. So any kind of story that clarified, deepened, or changed your sense of who you really are. Take a minute to think about it now. Maybe write it in your journal, take some notes. And then, if you want, also share it with your other ULAB participants, which will allow us to really kind of look into the global microcosm that we are together here as a community of change makers, where we have all these different experiences that lead us to connect deeper to the same kind of source.
So What did you hear? Any thoughts on what you heard him say?
It's Alethea. I heard adaptive leadership. I've heard transformation, because when we're adapting to leadership and adapting to environment, it's those transformations that take place in our life to determine who we really are and help us to step outside of ourselves, to reflect, to move into that next level, to challenge ourselves, who we really are. I remember when I was in the military, and I never thought that I could stay in the woods for 9 days, but it was when they drove me out 4 hours into the woods and left me there that I was able to make that transformation and adapt to my environment. And I found out some things about myself and who I really was as a leader, as a person, and just as an environmentalist. So it's the same here with this gentleman that went through that transition in his life.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, what'd you hear Otto say?
I mean, I agree, Alethea. I love that you gave that example, because I hear him say that you have to have these. I mean, he keeps coming back throughout his whole book to the fire, right? And the fire of the farm. And out of one side of my head, I'm like, yeah, everybody should have their own fire moment, but I would never want my students to have to come home to see their own house on fire, right? So the challenge for me is creating that type of environment in the classroom or out of the classroom, like an outward bound type experience, or, going to the mall and having a lesson at the mall. That's the challenge, is creating a transformative moment in a system that's, not a house burning down. And so, yeah, I love that, we shared our moment of being in the woods for a week, or, I used to work on Wall Street, September 2008. Like, there's nothing in the world that compares to that experience. But how do you not necessarily replicate those for students, but teach the same kind of the grit and the resilience that we developed from that in a classroom? That's what I keep hearing him ask, right? I don't know. Does anyone else hear that?
Okay. Others?
Christina, I wanted to add to what you just said when you take this experience into the classroom, because when we have, our children sometimes are resistant when, because they have their own mental models of what they think of math is. And to take that experience into the classroom, I would say, when we have math journals and students get to share their experience and how they worked out a problem. And I think that's that adaptation that takes place in that transformation. How did you work the problem out? How were you able to arrive at the same answer that this student did?
But I also think both of you raise an interesting question, because there is an entire body of literature and research emerging that's coming from a lot of different fields. One, it's coming from the neurosciences. It's coming from mindfulness studies. And I'm going to tell you, a person to take a look at is a Canadian, Adele Diamond, who does a lot of work with what's called executive functioning with young children. And the point, what Otto's getting you to begin to think about is what is your story? And as he said, the stories are all different. But as you reflect back, over your life, what type of events, did something to you which altered your thinking in relationship to making a choice of the past versus the future? And I think that becomes, that's the thing you're going to wrestle with as you go through this process. That might, and from my own experience, what I'll say to you is that it's important now, particularly over these 10 weeks, or what's less than 10 weeks now, is to focus on yourself right now, to do that deep dive into who you are, because what's going to happen eventually when you get into a couple of the courses, because when I designed this program, one of the things I wanted to get you to do is, so you went from 800, now you're into 845, which used to be 625, but now it's 845. And then you're going to go into 801 and 802. 802, you're going to deal with the whole issue of technology. And what is technology meaning to us today? And then in 801, you're actually going to experience going up the U by totally redesigning learning. So the sense is right now is that, okay, you're going to learn some interesting tools, but as educators particularly, and I don't care if you're K-12 or if you're in the the world of business and doing training in the business world, we're all looking at how do we get people to continually learn, continually to grow, and to continually look at the future. So I want you to think about that. And I think, obviously, when you read in the beginning of the book about the fire, and he came back, and I took this clip from his ULab course. He runs a major MOOC out of MIT. And there's been over 48,000 people worldwide involved in that MOOC. And what's interesting about the MOOC is that these hubs are forming all over the world, physical spaces where people get together. And by the way, I will send you the links to sign up for the next MOOC, because I'm going to strongly advise you to take the online course. It doesn't cost you anything, and you can go back into it anytime. It's not a scheduled type of course, but it's really interesting. And you also will be able to link in with people from around the world who are doing this stuff. So you can join these things. So I just want you to begin to understand this presencing, but to get to your question about how you take it into the classroom, this is becoming a major focal point, because the data is showing the more you can get young kids into doing mindfulness activities, then the better the behavioral issues are in classrooms, but more importantly, you begin to see a development of a kid developing aspiration for learning. And I don't care if the kid's coming out of North Philadelphia or Southeast Washington, D.C., or in Reading or in Harrisburg, that if the system is designed to focus on the open heart component of what he talks about, and not just segregating the mind from the heart, we're going to see a whole different learning process begin to emerge. So I'm really going to challenge you over the next several weeks about this, because this is something you as leaders have to begin to understand. Because if we're going to make change and get our kids to begin to think forward as opposed to the past, then this particular model here, and I'm just going to do this real quick because you see this in the book, is that this is what it is. So how do you suspend your assumptions? How do you redirect your ability to focus, to become more attuned to what's going on? How do you let go? How do you let come the possibilities? And the crystallizing is the vision, the prototyping is playing around with different ideas, and then eventually how do you change the institution where you're working? So the way in which the iceberg was a pretty interesting framework for thinking, this now gives you a very interesting framework for learning how to expose the mental models that underlie any structure that you're working in terms of your organization. So I just want to make sure that you're getting a sense of why this is here and what it's about. And obviously you're reading about all of these because now you're going up to you in your readings this week. So one of the other things then I think that becomes important around this idea of suspending is enabling us to see our seeing. So how do I view the world? How do I understand it? Allows this redirection is now I begin to understand the whole. Now I begin to let go to see a larger field of possibilities. The crystallizing leads to that vision, like I said. Prototyping is translating the vision into a way to express it, not through words, but through your hands. You build things. So I'll tell you, when you get an 801, even though you'll be online, you're going to be building stuff online using avatars or whatever you want to use to begin to express what your prototyping is about, and then the institutionalizes a new way of thinking and acting in a self-sustaining form. So these are the underlying framework, but here's the most important component of this that we really need to look at as he talks about this. The first one is this idea of the open mind, open heart, and open will. So when you have an open mind, it gives you the ability to suspend your judgment while listening to others. When you do that interview, I'm going to guarantee you that's going to be the hardest thing for you to do during that interview when you interview a leader. But why you need to do that from a research point of view is that when you're collecting data in the field through interviews, one of the things as a researcher you must do is bracket your mental models or your assumptions so you can hear the voice of the participant to get what they're talking about. So that's very important. Then the second part is to speak from the heart and then to listen to what is emerging. And I will tell you right now from my experience of working with your colleagues and other cohorts, that you will, if you get into this interviewing process, you will experience that component of speaking of the heart, and you will run into a time when you're working with the other individual that you will be interviewing, that the concept of time will dissipate for you. So I'm just throwing these things out for you just to make you aware of it, because this concept of open mind, open heart, and open will is extremely important to understand it. But it's also very important to deal with the question you raised: how do I take this into my classroom with my kids? And so training and exposing kids to the concept of open mind, open heart, open will is one of the things that you have to do. And then the second thing that is the internal quality about what this is that, and this is what Otto in that video is basically saying, is you need to really begin to think about your own personal experiences around change. And he said the stories are different. Obviously that fire really impacted him, but if you notice, what he said is it really didn't come to fruition until he got to MIT and he started working on this stuff. But it was set up as a kid, in that. And as he reflected back on it and as he started looking at it. So what I really want you to begin to think about as you go through this is, what are some of your own personal experiences related to profound change? And the reason I talk to you this way is that as a superintendent, I was highly successful as a superintendent and I was a total failure. And I can tell you about the failures. I can tell you about the success. And I've reflected upon why each one happened. And I learned a lot about it. And it helped me, actually, to tell you the truth, and you can blame me and Ed Bureau, a couple other people, for the organization of this program, because this program came about from a lot of our own experiences in terms of leadership. So that personal experience is very important. And then finally this is important, the I and thou perspective. So what is your assumption as whatever your role is now in terms of serving the whole? And what does it mean to, okay, even though I might be in this thing called third grade or seventh grade or high school, even within that space, what am I trying to do to affect humans and living systems that we're all working in? So this might sound deep philosophical. Yeah, it is, but it's something that leaders need to begin to think about and to reflect upon, regardless of whether or not you believe you're a behavioralist or you're a constructivist or whatever your personal thinking about learning is. These things are very important for you to dive into as we go through Theory U. Let me just stop. Any comments or thoughts right now, or just opinions or something you want to say? Besides, when's this over? I always think there's a thin line between comedy and tragedy. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say that this has been a really enlightening first 3 weeks in this course, because this course truly gets you to look at you as the person you are, or the person that you're trying to aspire to be. So I am just really excited about the information that we are getting from this course, because ultimately we are going to be leaders if we're not already leaders. And this allows us to really take a deeper look into ourselves and reflect on some things that we may need to change or improve on in the future in order for us to be much more successful in the avenues in which we are trying to obtain. So this has been truly, truly an eye-opener for me, and just reflecting back on the past and current things that have happened within the last, few months. It has allowed me to really assess myself and redirect some things and learn how to make changes in some things that I've done in the past. So moving forward, I know how to handle different situations. So this information is good, and I'm thankful that we're getting this opportunity because working with some of the leaders that I work with now, I can refer a couple of them to this course. They need to take it.
That's your job. You got to train them.
They need to take this course, because I don't think it was a part of their process when taking on a leadership role. So yes, this has been excellent thus far.
Okay. Any other comments, thoughts right now before we?
I can add something. I think for me, it's while I read this and just listening to you and listening to the video, I am questioning things. I'm questioning why I've done certain things, why I've chosen certain. I was an undergrad. I have a bachelor's in marketing, and I went into education, and I thought I knew why I did that, and now I'm almost like, am I sure I knew why I did that? But I'm also appreciative of what you said about just now about making some mistakes along the way as well. And I feel sometimes there's people in my building and I'm their boss and they're 20 years older than me. And sometimes that's hard. And I don't always, I'll be honest, I don't always make the right call either on some things. So I think it's just this really looking at ourselves and taking that step back and trying to apply everything that we're learning to make better decisions and be better leaders.
Yeah, good. Remember, who was it? Steven Tyler of Aerosmith said, "Life is a journey." Remember?
Oh, I have some stories, but I'll keep them to myself.
I'll just say, but that's it. That reflective process, I think, is extremely, important for you. And and again, and what I want you to do in your reflective conversation groups is to carry this on. Because again, what Sharma's talking about and what we're looking at is that qualities of results are produced. Any system depends on the quality of awareness. That's the key. So if you're building principle and you have these teachers, how do you create the environment to make them more aware of their own thinking? That's what we're beginning to look at. And so what it means for a leader is really, and again, this is the important thing, the success of your actions as a leader does not depend on what we do or how we do it, but from the inner place from which we operate from. And if you really think about that statement, and these slides will be available for you, I'm going to post them up on the recording so you can download them. That's very important for you to kind of reflect on. It's not how, what we do or how we do it. It's why we're doing it. Where does it come from? Why are we doing this? That to me is an extremely important component of this program that when you get out of here, meaning, you get your doctorate, et cetera. I don't really care about your doctorate and getting a degree. Obviously I do. But what's more important is when you leave, do you have an understanding of that? And then if you do, how are you going to make it actionable for the people who you're working with? That to me is the essence of what we're looking at. So the core of leadership then is about shaping and shifting how individuals and groups attend to and subsequently respond to a situation. That's important. Now, I'll give you a quick example where downloading comes into play is that sometimes a complexity of an event that takes place within your organization in the classroom sometimes demands that we have to ask the question, is the structure appropriate or are even the policies appropriate, and how do we need to shift them in order to deal with moving forward to whatever's going on? Because the tendency in education is because it's a highly conservative environment. What I mean by conservative is it doesn't like, it's got a structure there, and it's a hierarchical structure, and it's scary to make these types of changes. The problem is the outside world of education is so radically changing, particularly because of exponential growth in technology and flow of information, that a lot of our old assumptions about why we're doing education are getting blown out of the water. Same way in business and military, everywhere it's getting done. So this, though, I think becomes very important for you to think about, in that when he talks about this concept, this is what you got to really begin to delve into. What are your blind spots? What don't you see? So we're blind to the deeper dimensions of leadership and transformational change, and that the deeper you reflect on who you are to find your inner source, the more you're going to begin to understand your blind spots. So, I'm not going to do it now, but I can tell you why I was a failure in that last district I was in. And it's because I had blind spots. I was just not aware of it. And those blind spots were complicated by a lot of things that were going on inside of me that had consequences in terms of my actions that I had no awareness of. And it cost me, basically a job, in doing what I wanted to do. But then again, the organization had a lot of blind spots too. So, it's a two-way street. So that becomes important for you to think about. And so I'm going to just take you through this real quick. So you're going to read about these fields of attention. And so that first one is, and really this is what the whole issue of what downloading is acting from the center of my organization. I only see the world from the organizational point of view, my point of view. The second level then of attention that we have to move towards is that, okay, now I'm willing to come to the periphery and to look outside the windows to see possibilities of what other people are doing. The third level then of attention is where now I begin to step outside of the boundaries of my organization. And an organization can be anything. It can be a family structure. It can be myself. It can be a church. It can be a civil group. It doesn't matter. The school, etc. It's now I'm beginning to explore the organization outside of it, and then the attention that we're really trying to get towards is really acting from the emerging spheres of across one's organizational boundary. So for example, I'll just talk to you real quick. The problem in high schools particularly is that we have departments and we have silos. We have science department, history department, social studies department, art department, etc. And the problem is most of those, I will guarantee you, act from number one up there, from their point of view. But the world, because of technology and the flow of information and the ubiquitousness of information and how different disciplines cross over boundaries, demands almost the ability for us to organize our entire structure of, I'll say K-12, and actually university level, is to emerge at this level that we're working across boundaries. So math and music and science integrate and begin to explore ways to integrate those for kids to become actively involved in that because the technology allows it to happen. So my point is as you read through this, and we'll be talking about this more as we go through the weeks, these levels of attention are extremely important for you to look at and to begin to understand. You need to know where you are with them, and you need to know where your organization is. And they also will become important when you do that interview. And we'll talk about that more. So I just want to make sure you understand those fields of attention. And the other thing is, and I'm going to go through this real quick, because we'll come back to this. Sharmer's talking about right now that we're dealing with major divides in who we are as people. First one is this thing called self to nature. That means, and you'll have this thing, I'm not going to embellish upon this right now, but when you look at the ecological divide that we're dealing with, that the problem we're faced with from a sustainability point of view is that we are consuming almost, and some people say, a total 2 planet worth more than we're able to replenish the resources on our planet. And that is a major issue for all of us. The other one is the self to others. There are 7.2 billion people living on this earth. 2.5 billion of them live in abject poverty. And so the divide, and you know what's going on politically, even in the United States, is that whole issue between the 99% and the 1%. Sharmer talks about that is the divide between ourselves and other people. And then the third one, and this is an extremely important one, is what he calls the spiritual cultural divide. And the number there is 3. And basically what that is, self to self. So really, as you look at this data right here, there are more people today committing suicide on this planet than people dying in wars, accidents, and national disasters, etc. And I always use the example, and I should put the picture up there, is that when I do travel into Philadelphia to go in there, one of the things I noticed about 1.5 years ago is in every single SEPTA station, there is suicide hotline prevention signs up. Every single one of them, because the number of people jump in front of trains, killing themselves. Even out here in Lancaster County, the big debate, was whether or not they needed to put a fence up in the parking lot in Lancaster City because the number of people are trying to jump off the top of there to commit suicide. So actually then there are more people today. So the real danger of violence today is ourselves, because there's more people killing themselves. So Sharmer talks about that divide. And that one, I think, is a critical one that we need to talk to our kids about as we go through. Now, I just want to show you, there's a 4th divide, and I've talked to Otto about this, that Ed Buer and I are putting together a ebook that deals a lot with this, is that I think there's a 4th divide, and that's the technological divide. And that number 47% by, I think it's 2013, 47% of the working people in actually in the United States, but it's even greater in the world, will be replaced by automation. 47%. And I'll show you down the road some statistics about Pennsylvania. So for example, Harrisburg and Reading are on the list of cities that are in most danger of losing more than 45% of their workforce to automation. So just want to throw that out for you. So those divides are very important to think about. And as educators, what I'm going to challenge you about as you get into these divides a little bit deeper is, okay, tell me how your present schooling and the curriculum is addressing these divides. So that's going to be a question, that we'll explore later on. So a couple concluding thoughts. So let you read that. Very important, especially when you're a teacher, that we end up telling them what we think they need to know. And then in the process, we miss the opportunity to build relationships based on that curiosity. And then also, this comes from Egbert Schein, who is, a fantastic individual and understanding about conversation and human relations, that, as he says, if I feel I have something to learn from you or want to hear from you some of your experience or feeling because I care for you or need something from you to accomplish a task, this makes me temporarily dependent and vulnerable. And I think that, to me, is extremely important. So as you begin to think about how do you increase conversation and how do you get people to genuinely become empathetic both in listening and talking, these concepts are extremely important. And then finally is that, so presence is deep listening and being open beyond your own perceptions and historical ways of making sense. That's one, and I'm going to tell you right now, that's one of the problems we're facing in this country because of the political divide. That there's no way, we're not at this level of understanding and having deep listening, because then finally is, understanding presence and the possibility of larger fields of change, comes from many different perspectives, but you got to work together in order to do that. That generative capacity of, nature gives us a way of beginning to think about that. Until we move in that direction and create a positive story, these are the issues you're going to face as educators when you're dealing with kids. But then as human beings working in a society, it's dealing with very complex issues that we have to start, getting people to think about this. But more importantly, our actions have to promote this. So I think that's where I'm going to end. And just basically ask you, any closing thoughts or ideas. And if you want to torture yourself again, this will be posted on YouTube. So you can listen to it again. And those of you who will listen to this first time, obviously, they'll be able to watch this. But I like you really within your reflective conversations, to kind of let this percolate for a couple days and then get into it and begin to explore it with each other. Okay, so any concluding thoughts on your part? Let me just stop the share and have everybody up there. And if not, that's okay. So, I will say to you then, good night. I'll be the last person on, and you can, go off into the ether or the matrix or wherever you want to go. So have a good one. And I'll be the last person on in case you have any questions or just want to say something before you leave.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Okay.